I want to start off by thanking all of you for giving me this opportunity to speak. We've called this more than one approach because sometimes we get in a habit and we get in a pattern of doing things in the same sequence without asking the question, are there other options? And so that's really what we're going to focus on today. But before we do that, let's talk about hunting. So here's the thing. I've been thinking about moose hunting, and I've never gone before, but I want to try. But I only have one firearm. It's a .44 Magnum. It's pretty awesome, but it's a snub nose. It's one of those scandium ones with the night guards. I'm really proud of my firearm, and I'm actually a pretty good shot with it. So what do you guys think? Is that okay to take that moose hunting? Closer? So would it work? That's a really good point. Like,
if it's asleep.
If it's asleep, okay. Perfect. So there is a potential I could take my firearm out there and I might get a moose, right? Like, I might struggle, but I could get there. Well, if I wanted to do it more efficiently and I wanted to have a better, probability of success, what should I take? Anybody? A what? A rifle. What size a rifle? All right, a 300 Win Mag. Are those super expensive if I buy them used? Nope. How much? That's awesome, Brian. Okay, so wait a second. I have an $800 .44, right? I mean, like, I spent a lot of money on this gun, probably too much, but I love it. So I could get a different gun for less money and be more effective, more efficient. That's possible. It's not too good to be true, right? It's not. That's just it. Sometimes when I start to talk about design build or other alternative delivery methods, I always feel like a salesperson. And I feel like people sometimes, and they have said this, it sounds a little bit too good to be true. Your buddy, when you tell him that a 300 is better to shoot a moose, and he's going to tell you, well, that sounds too good to be true, you're all like, no, dude, it's just not the right tool for the job. Same with duct tape and electrical tape. Were they both tape? Yes. Do they have different purposes? Yes. So that's sort of my cheesy analogy to just kind of say that there are a lot of options and there's a lot of ways to approach these projects. Use the right tool for the job, just like if you're going to go hunting. So there's also a mix in this room of people. Some of you are intimately involved in the delivery of your construction projects, right? Some of you are there making the decisions, you're interfacing with the feasibility studies and the master plans and trying to get the funding, and others are not. You're out running your harbors and making sure everybody's safe and doing your day-to-day operations and roles. But I still think that today applies to you because whether you're the one making the decision or not, if you have more knowledge, then you can help influence how your projects are moving forward. Furthermore, we're often afraid of what we don't know, and so people are a little bit hesitant to try something new. But if you have that knowledge that hopefully you'll gain today, you might be able to have those conversations with your public works director or somebody else and say, hey, have we thought about this, right? And start asking the right questions because it will impact you. As you know, at some point you always end up, being involved in that construction project one way or another. So discussion points for today. We're going to go over just some basic, overly simplified definitions of the different options. We're going to talk about some facts. So my goal today is to really just give you a neutral perspective. And so a lot of the information that are on these slides are based on organizations. So you have some information on your tables from the Design Build Institute of America. There's also the Construction Industry Institute. So my hope is to not stand up here and give you a bunch of opinions. Instead, it's to give you some information that's been developed by others. And then we're going to talk a little bit about procurement and contracts, steps for moving forward, and then what your resources are. Before I jump into this slide, I guess I should go ahead and preface a little bit about why am I the one up here talking with you today, right? There's a lot of people in this room who have been doing projects much longer than, frankly, I've been alive. And there's a lot of opinions out there about is design build good? Is it bad? Is CMGC the better approach? So just a very short bit about my background. I actually started with contractors. So when I got out of school, I went to work for construction firms. And I started with design build. So I was involved with these processes where everybody had a seat at the table. So when we were developing designs, we had our subcontractors there. We had our superintendent sitting there talking to us about how we were going to set these girders. Primarily, my background was in bridge construction at that time. So the first 5-6 years that I started my career, it was always in this very collaborative manner. I thought that was normal. And then I wanted to stay in Oregon longer, so I switched companies and I went to go work for a small bridge contractor. Only had about a crew of 20 guys. And it was a great experience, mainly because we switched over to low bid, right? And I was blown away. It's not that there's not a place and time for that, but what I recognized is the people that needed to be in the room having the conversations that I had previously seen, they weren't there. So how many of you have, you're excited, you finally get several years of your project development going, your contractor shows up, and you're all jazzed because you want this job to go great, and then the barge shows up, and the contractor's like, dude, why are you doing it this way? Right? I mean, how often does that happen where you're like, what do you know about this job? You haven't been involved for the last 3 years. This is why we're doing it this way. That's true. Often people just don't know the history behind why you got to where you're at. But sometimes, had that contractor been involved a little bit earlier, there might have been another approach or another method to think about that you just didn't know because you didn't ask, right? So we all want these things. We want greater cost certainty. We want a quality product. We don't want conflicts. Nobody wants a job with conflicts. That's just not a fun way to show up to work every day. We want fewer changes. Change orders are a pain. Lower administration effort, timely completion, positive reputation, right? You want to come to these harbor master conventions and talk to your peers and stuff and say, yeah, we had this great project. Well, engineers and contractors want the same thing. We all want these things. But what's happening sometimes is we're not getting those things. And there's some studies out there. There's a slew of them. And they said the worst performing projects, these were the top 5 reasons. Number 1, they engaged the contractor late in the design. Number 2, they had limited or no prior team experience. So a lot of you have had to work with contractors, right? You're forced to because they're low bid, and you're like, oh, I got to work with these guys again. I know they're not good. Well, that's the system you chose, right? Too many contract clauses that just weren't legit. Sometimes there'll be things in a contract that don't hold up. They're actually not legal clauses. So that's never good. A poor ability to make decisions. As a past contractor, it's very frustrating when you're working with an owner that you're like, man, I gotta get this decision, right? So, and then the ability to pre-qualify. This isn't my opinion. This is literally what a study has shown the results are. These are the reasons that projects have failed or have been poor performing. So how do we fix that? There's lots of ways. We can always do design bid build, which is the low bid that most of us are familiar with. We can always do that better, and sometimes there's a time and place to do that. These are some other options, and this is what we're gonna spend some time talking about. Just to get us all on the same page with the terminology, we have design build, we have progressive design build, CMGC, or sometimes people call that CMAR, construction management at risk. And then, I'm not gonna talk about these very much, but I wanted you to know that they exist. There's also multi-prime, integrated delivery, and public-private partnerships. The last two are actually very similar. It's sort of a 3-way contract. The difference with the last one is that, as AECOM mentioned when they were giving their introduction, there's a thing where private industry can help and partner with a public entity to help finance things. So that's really what the bottom is, and to even own or operate and maintain it. That's usually a key component of those. We're not gonna go into all these details. I'm putting this up here to show you that there are a lot of options, a lot, and in a lot of different manners. So just to get our terms squared away here, we have project delivery systems, we have procurement methods, and contract formats. This is, again, a publication by DBIA. It's on your table. There's a lot of information out there about this, but here's some misconceptions. Sometimes people say, oh, design build, that's a best value procurement. Yeah, it can be. But you can do design, build, low bid. Is it advised? No, but you can. You can actually even do design, bid, build based on a best value. So this, I wish I could mix them all up. You can combine all these different options in a variety of ways. One doesn't necessarily equal the other. So sometimes we hear the word, okay, it's best value contracting. Well, the best value part actually isn't the contract. The contract is probably a lump sum fixed fee, or it's a guaranteed maximum price, okay? So the best value is really how you're selecting your team, right? And we're gonna talk more about best value. But my point is, we as an industry are not very consistent in how we talk about alternative delivery. It's a national issue. And that's in part why there are organizations like DBIA and others that try to set just sort of a standard. So when you see on my slides design, bid, build, that is what most people call low bid, right? That's what we're used to. You do the design, you put it out for bid, and you take the lowest responsible bidder. So I'm gonna make this super simple. Rather than go into pros and cons of all of these right now, let's just get on the same page about a couple things. Design, bid, build, low bid is 2 contracts, always. That's what that definition means. What is CMGC? Construction Manager General Contractor. In Washington, they call it GCCM. I still think they're crazy. I don't know why they have to be unique, but they are. Same thing. It's also 2 contracts. This isn't about how it's procured, whether it's low bid, anything. This is just about the contractual mechanism. And that's really, in essence, an alternative delivery that's missed. People, when they're talking about it, they say, oh yeah, that's a good approach if you're gonna use, you have a fast track project. Well, yeah, that's true, but there's actually a contractual difference between these. And in CMGC, it's very much like our traditional design bid build because there's 2 contracts. It's just phased, which is actually kind of cool because it involves the contractor earlier, right? I know, Ronnie, there's a project currently in Anchorage that went CMGC, right? It's in procurement right now. So this is a mechanism that's used, and it does have its advantages. It can be a really effective approach. So basically 2 phases. You involve the contractor in what are considered pre-construction services. So they do have a seat at the table. They're helping to give feedback. They're working with the engineers and the owner. These are the pros and cons. They're helping to do cost estimates so that those estimates are a little bit more accurate. So they're intimately involved. And then it goes to construction, right? But there's still 2 contracts. So what's design build? There's 1 contract. That's literally the definition of design build. So as the city, as the owner, you hire 1 company. What's kind of cool that I don't think happens a lot here is we always think of a contractor being the lead design builder, right? And they go and hire the engineering firm to be part of their team. That's not actually always the case. There are engineering firms who are the lead design builder that hire a contractor to be part of their team. There are other scenarios where a contractor has its own engineers. So there is no additional contract with an engineering firm. There's just a whole mix of situations out there. All of them have their pros and cons. It just depends on what the market's like as well. But I really want to hone in on the 1 contract thing because I have heard people say, yeah, we did this great project. It was awesome. We got to pre-qualify the contractors. It was just like design build. It's like, no, there is nothing like design build. It's only design build if there's 1 contract. And I don't mean that like to sound critical. It's just there's some inconsistencies that I think need to be a little bit cleared up. There's also what's called progressive design build, which is kind of this hodgepodge between how they've approached CMGC and how we approach design build. So remember, I said design build's always 1 contract. It's 1 contract, but it's phased. So they divide it up and you have pre-construction services where you're engaged with the contractor and you're talking about design before you actually agree to continue on with a construction contract with them. There's sort of a hold point in it. And we'll talk more about that later today. We could do a whole conference on progressive design build, but it's another mechanism. Okay, so here's the facts. Again, lots of pros and cons to these. 2 things I don't think get talked about enough is that in design bid build, or in our low bid, we have these 2 factors that are really important. I've already spent some time talking about number 2, that the lack of early contractor involvement and collaboration can really be a factor. But what we don't talk about is the Spearin Doctrine. It's a court case from 1918. And Spearin was a company that was hired to do a dry dock in Brooklyn in 1918. I believe it was an Army Corps of Engineers project, I think. And a lot of the way we do business today is based on past court cases, and that's just how it is, right? So the Spearin Doctrine concluded from the results of this project that I won't waste your time going into great detail, but it was basically a dry dock that ended up flooding and causing a bunch of damage. And the contractor ended up winning this court case because he built what was on the plans. So he was able to prove that this wasn't my fault, right? And you know how change orders are, right? Everybody's going, whose fault is this? So the Spearman Doctrine concluded that the owner warrants the plans and specs are free from errors and omissions. So you are liable to make sure that your designs, and you're like, wait, but I didn't do the design. Correct. There's a liability gap. So engineers are kind of, in some regard, like doctors. What we say is that they have a standard of care that they have to follow, right? So if their plans, they do the best they can, and they use their best engineering judgment, and they use all of the information that they have, and they make sound judgments, and they do. But errors and omissions insurance, we always think of that like, oh, if my engineer messes up, I'll just go get him for his errors and omissions. Well, you have to prove negligence. Just like if your surgeon messes up when he's doing your surgery and something goes wrong, you're gonna have to prove he was negligent. Or was it just something that happens as a normal course of things, right? So I'm kind of going off on a tangent here, but the point about the Spearman Doctrine is it's not, we don't get to go to our engineers and say, errors and omissions, you guys need to cover this. I mean, when's the last time you went to your engineering firm and said, you owe me $1 million, you screwed this drawing up? We don't do that. We trust them, we work with them a lot, and they actually put out pretty good work. So why is it that the owner is on the hook? You got the contractor who says, hey, I'm just building what you told me to. And then you have the engineer saying, I did the best I could do. This is what I had, right? The owner is in the middle. You're always in the middle of the situation. And the lack of early contractor involvement, all those things, or those two main things, influence everything on the right. It influences innovation, quality, efficiencies, constructability, and the big one there is trust, right? So when we have all this gap going on, people kind of stop trusting each other, and it becomes a not a very nice way to do business. So how do we fix it? Well, CMGC eliminates one of these, right? We said, great, CMGC brings the contractor on board early. Perfect. We still have the Spearman Doctrine because there's still two contracts, right? The owner is still that liability gap between the contractor and the engineer. In design build, those go away. And again, it's like the firearm. I know it sounds too good to be true. I'm telling you it's not. And the data shows it's not too good to be true. It benefits everybody, not just the owner, but it benefits the engineer and it benefits the contractor if it's done correctly. So here's the thing though, it requires a mental shift. It's going from us versus them to trust. And I don't say team here because I love this quote. It says a team is not a group of people who are working together. A team is a group of people who trust each other. And that sounds like wish-washy, like, you know, kumbaya sort of speech, but it's the truth. If you don't have trust, these alternative procurement methods are not gonna work. So here's a couple myths. I hear a lot when I talk about alternative procurement conceptions out there. One of them is, I can't trust a contractor with the design. They only care about profit. That's true, contractors care about profit, so do engineering firms. We're all in business to make money. So the reason that myth, I'll call it, is out there is because there is an issue of mistrust. And that mistrust, this is an opinion, in my opinion, is a byproduct of the low bid environment, right? So how would it make you feel if somebody said, Carl, let's pretend you're a consultant. Carl, I'm gonna hire you. Give me a price, please. Oh, okay, perfect, you're low. Carl, I'm gonna choose you because you were the lowest guy. Like, does that even like that's not cool, right? No one wants to be chosen because they're the lowest bid. Like, that's not an incentive to do a good job. That's not indicative of being trustworthy. So over time, and there's a whole history about it that starts a while ago, mainly during the Industrial Revolution, where there was a lot of corruption. We started separating engineering and construction services. And for good reason. There was corruption and there was a lot of distrust that actually had some merit behind it. But what I'm suggesting here is that we stop thinking of contractors as somebody we can't trust and think of them as a professional service. And the reason is because a good reference is worth more than a single project's profit. In alternative delivery, when the next time that contractor has to work for you or next time they have to propose, they better have done a good job the last time. Like, how do you turn in a proposal and say, yeah, sorry, I royally screwed up that job, but go ahead, pick me for this one? That's just it. In low bid, no one cares if they do a good job or a bad job, right? Because you told them what to build. They're just doing what you told them. So this mistrust that we have about contractors can be fixed. And the other thing that always cracks me up, they're like, well, I can't trust the contractor. I mean, they're just going to design whatever they want, and who knows, they're going to, make it cheap. There is always an engineer involved, right? You don't, as a contractor, nobody's saying, okay, as a contractor, you get to go stamp those plans. That's not it. The engineers have such an intimate involvement in this process, and at the end of the day, they're still on the hook. I mean, they have to sign off on those plans. And trust me, I've been that design builder trying to talk the engineer into something, and they're like, she is so crazy. True. But sometimes there's an idea that works, right? But they have to prove that it works. So my point is they're still involved. It's not a contractor just out there doing whatever they want. So the other myth is that contractors need a lot of oversight to ensure a quality product. That's actually not true. If you've ever worked around a contractor, like in the field, and I know a lot of you have, even people who aren't a builder, you've spent time out there. And usually a builder takes pride in what they do. It's actually part of the industry, right? They want to do a good job, the people in the field. So when you do alternative delivery, they have a greater sense of ownership in that work because there's no one to blame. A contractor who goes out and they build something and they're like, yeah, that's what the engineer told me to do. I mean, they also have sometimes mistrust in who put the plans together, which isn't always fair. But they can point the finger. But what happens if they're just pointing the finger at themselves? That doesn't work, right? So they take that pride and ownership. And they also care about their reputation and a common interest. It is as important, if not more important to them, that that job goes well. Not only for you, but for them, because the two are the same. Additionally, in alternative delivery, there are clauses and other reasons that they have an ethical obligation to do right by the owner. They have an obligation to look out for the owner's best interest, just like a professional service, just like when you go to hire a consultant, that's your expectation. And an owner still has a say. So if you have a good RFP and a solid contract and the right team, quality takes care of itself. I really like this. I took it from a DBIA presentation. I mean, who in here hasn't been on a project where you didn't feel like this was the situation you were in, right? It's just true. And we're all kind of tired of it. So again, it requires a mental shift. It's about trust and committed openness. You cannot have a successful alternative delivery project if you don't trust the people you're sitting across from. It won't work. It is a professional service. It's a mindset. And here's the other thing, it's actually not for everyone. So sometimes I'll say, design build isn't right for every job. That's true, it's not. And the number one reason it's not is because the owner or the contractor or the engineer, that team, isn't cut out for alternative delivery. Sometimes people are stuck in their old ways and they don't know how to shift. You don't want those kind of people doing alternative delivery. Contractor, designer, and trust me, as a contractor and designer, we don't want an owner who's stuck in their old ways either, because it doesn't work. So what we need is people willing to understand the risks and take it on in a different way. But we also have to have people, and it's kind of cool when you see it. You're like, yes, you do get design build. Because instead of being reactive or automatic, they're responsive and reflective. They don't say, oh, I know it already. They don't have that attitude about them. Instead, they actually value not knowing. They're not judgmental, they're accepting. And I know these are like sensitive things to talk about, but it's true. These are characteristics in the people that you do work with, and it's very important in alternative delivery that they have these sort of characteristics. And more importantly, they are not rigid, but they're adaptive. And so when you have all those things come together, this is what the stats say. I'm gonna focus on the first column there, which is design build versus design bid build. This is one, again, of many studies. That's it in black and white. I mean, this study in particular, I think, is close to 300 projects, but there are other studies similar with higher quantities. 6% lower cost. The speed is 12% faster of the construction, but the overall, from the time you said I have a job I want to do to when you're using it, is 33.5% faster on average. Cost growth, meaning you thought it was this and it ended up being more. It's actually the other way. It's 5% less. Schedule growth, less. Here's another thing. It's been on the rise for the last 25 years. DBIA has released a study by, I believe it's McGraw-Hill, who says that nationally 40% of all non-residential construction is done design build. Like, that's a big number, right? This isn't new. It is a proven method. In the state of Alaska and most municipalities here, it's authorized and legal. And also shovel ready. So when Mike was talking earlier today, do you remember the slide that Mike showed that said the average time frame for those projects was 16 months? And in most of those, that was after design, right? And that's what they consider shovel ready, like you're ready to build. If that's the definition, there is no better mechanism than design build, period. Because, for example, in Kodiak, that total duration from the time they got the funding, which was last August, until when that project was open, was 10 months. 10 months. And that was not from design until construction. That was, we have no design at this point when we're applying for our harbor grant, but as soon as you give us the funding, we'll deliver, and we'll deliver within 10 months. And that's what happened. So when we say that design build gives you the opportunity to do shovel ready, that's what we mean, because there's a lot of overlap that can happen that makes it more efficient to deliver. So the approach at CTF was that the grant application was an RFP. So it just, I mean, you heard Mike, he said, I just need a couple conceptual drawings. He doesn't need 60 drawings for these applications. Give him your idea, say, if you give me the money, we'll go design build, and we'll have the project designed and built in this amount of time. And he's totally pro design build. I think I can speak for him. If not, he's not here to argue with me. So, but we called him in advance of submitting that application and said, what do you think of this? He's like, yeah, it sounds great. He brought up the example in Whittier, right, where they have the sole source opportunity. Well, design build does it allows not for sole source. It's still very competitive. But it allows that same, all the benefits he was saying about sole source are the same benefits about design build as far as shovel ready goes. So procurement and contract, there's lots of options. Sole source, I think everyone knows what that is. It's actually usually not allowed in public works, and they really prefer competitive, fair, transparent process. Low bid, you all know what that is. Again, design build can be low bid. The state of Florida does it all the time. I don't agree with it, but they do it. You can do qualifications only. That's legit as well. Negotiated and best value. So we're going to talk about best value because that's the preferred best practice. So best value means that you're going to consider more than just price. And that more than just price can be so many different things. I've just listed a couple. But you're asking people about their past performance, their references, their experience, their capabilities, their management approach. And this is one that I don't think gets asked enough. Give me a risk assessment. Imagine handing somebody a document and saying, how would you handle risk on this project? Have them tell you about it and then evaluate it. The best thing you can do, though, is interview people. You really learn so much when you just get to have that face-to-face conversation with them. So you take all those things and you factor it in with the price, and then you pick the best value. Some of the options are you can actually set a fixed price. You could say, my budget is $10 million. Give me all my options for $10 million, right? And that kind of sounds like the owner's getting a bunch of things for free, right? Because it's expensive for engineering firms and for contractors to put together these proposals if you're asking for too much. So it's really about balancing it, because you don't want to have your contractor put together, a proposal this thick for a $2 million job. It's just not right. And most states, if not all, do stipends. So they actually give contractors and engineers some money back, saying thanks for all this effort. Doesn't usually cover the cost, but it's close to at least a thank you, I feel like. So you want to balance how much you're asking for. And as an engineering firm that's part of this team, it's not necessary to go into the little tiny details of the design. You don't want to over-design this thing. You don't even have the job yet. Just design it enough to get the picture across, right? So a myth, the more we design it, the less risk we have. This is still happening. The projects I've been involved in recently, it's a hard thing to get over. Sometimes we feel like if we don't tell them everything, then how do we know that we can control the design, right? We still have to have that control. And I'm gonna lose it if I don't tell them. It's actually not the case, and if it's managed appropriately. In alternative delivery, the less design actually equals the less risk. And that's called performance criteria or performance specifications. We're not telling somebody or an engineer, this is your basis of design. And we get nervous and we start to kind of do this hodgepodge of things because we want to tell them what the basis of design is, but it's not our job to as an owner or an owner's rep. It's really to say, this is what I want the facility to function like, right? Just big picture, right? I want a dock, and I want it to be this big, and I want it to handle this load, and it would be great if it lasted 50 years. I mean, that sort of criteria. But what, you don't start specifying, or you shouldn't if you can avoid it, wind and wave criteria and these coefficients, because every time you take something like that on, it's like the sentence says here, the more you specify, the more you own it. So that Spearn doctrine we were talking about that I said goes away, right? The owner is liable for what information it gives a contractor, that it's accurate. If you told somebody, if you told an engineer, use this factor when you're doing the work, you now own that factor. If something's wrong with that factor later, you told them to use it. Hopefully a good engineer, which most of them are, would say, hey guys, this really isn't a very good coefficient, or whatever. You know, you give that feedback and dialogue along the way. So again, less design, the better. Don't over-design this thing and then put it out for an alternative delivery. You've hacked out the innovation. So competition helps foster innovation. It's truly the case. It's about adding value. It's not okay for designers to compete on price. That was established many years ago. And it's about public safety, and it's valid. The thing is that it's absolutely okay to create competitions based on solutions. So if you ask people, give me some solutions here, and you allow the industry to compete on solutions, I can tell you for a fact you're going to get more ideas and more solutions by allowing competition to foster those ideas. So then we have the contract. So there's lots of different ways to do this. There's also an ability to mix them. So you could have a guaranteed maximum price with unit prices within it and cost plus fee. There's so many options of how this can be structured. So when does assessing your delivery approach fit in? I mean, I didn't put these in an order or a schedule because every project somehow starts at a different starting point, right? Sometimes you skip everything on the left and there is no master planning or community involvement and you just go straight to the project. Other times, especially the bigger ones, you really do all these things on the left. And then once we get that done, we usually move over here and we issue an engineering RFQ. Pick our engineer, and we start moving forward. We try to get our funding. We do a bunch of cost estimates throughout the whole process. We add contingencies. Then we start collecting data. We start doing geotechnical studies and environmental studies and permits. And we've spent in almost every presentation that has talked about delivering construction projects has talked about the duration, right? It can just really take a long time. It's true, and sometimes that's all well within reason. So where do you fit in? Like, I'm going design build, or I'm going CMGC, or I'm going design bid build? And the answer, sooner would be better than later, and now would be better than sooner. You just really can't start soon enough with that point. It's rarely too late to do that. So every project is unique, but it's okay to ask. So if you are at a point on a project right now where you're at 75% design and you're like, yeah, great presentation, Amanda, but we're well past this, that actually may not be true. You might want to stick with your engineer, and rightfully so at 75% or 90%, even 30%. If it's going well, fine, stick with them. But maybe CMGC is a good opportunity then. Maybe you still want the contractor to have a seat at the table. You're still going to have that Spearn doctrine thing, right? But at least have the opportunity to have the conversation of, are there other options? Do we want to go low bid? Do we want to do some qualifications on contractor selection? Just know your options. In a perfect world, I would suggest that you assess if this might be an option before you issue your engineering RFQ, because depending on how you approach the project, there may be opportunities to do different scopes of services with an engineering firm. So you might decide you're going design build and that, yes, we do want a geotechnical study and we do need 30% drawings or whatever it may be. That's going to shape your scope of services with your engineering firm versus if you were doing a scope of services for a design bid build, right? I mean, they're going to have different tasks, a different scope of work, et cetera. So keep that in mind. So it's not all calm seas. I don't know if you can see the gill net there, but I did this very short stint of commercial fishing, like just a couple weeks, and I was like, oh wow, commercial fishing's easy. Look at how nice these waters are. But It wasn't like that every day. It was the first day. So I don't want to paint this picture that design build is calm seas. It's not, and nor is CMGC. If you don't do it right, you're going to have all the same problems that you would have on a low bid job, or some of them. So it's really about making risk-informed decisions. We heard that from the core. It's a very good point. And following some best practices. And if it's not DBIA, okay, well, find some good best practices then. Don't just do what your gut tells you. Use what the industry has found to work and has been proven over time. So risk allocation. The ideal contract, this is by the Construction Industry Institute, is one that would be the most cost-effective. Which I always think that's funny, because I don't know if you ask people in this room what's your ideal contract, if their answer would be the one that's the most cost-effective, but it kind of does boil down to that. Is the one that assigns each risk to the party that is best equipped to manage and minimize that risk, recognizing the unique circumstances of the project. So I don't have enough time to go into every one of these pictures, but every job is unique. So on some projects, you could actually put all the geotechnical aspects onto the design builder. You could do that. Is that the right solution on every design build? Absolutely not. What about marine mammals? This permitting thing, right? I mean, do you have your design builder do the permits? Or do you get those permits before you bring on your design builder? It's different. It just depends on the job. Wave analysis. I mean, there are so many studies we could be doing. But the thing is remember that slide that said the more you do, the more you own? That's the case in a lot of things. But it doesn't mean you just shift all the risk away from you. That's not appropriate either. It's about a balance about who is most capable of managing that risk. The top picture, this was a heck of a job down south in Oregon, and it's a sad project that was supposed to be 3 years long and ended up being about 12 years long. It's like everyone's nightmare. It goes down in history as like one of the worst design build projects ever. It's a DOT job. And what happened is the state did this geotechnical report, a very extensive one. It's like a 30-mile long job. And the design builder relied on that information for the most part. They had engineers on board and everything. They used this geotechnical report. And everybody sort of, not only the geotech, but I think also the structural engineers that were designing the foundations, everybody underestimated the slide potential in the area. And they literally built new structures and then had to tear them all down before the road ever opened. So it was a design build job. I just want to give an example that it can go bad. Maybe in that particular scenario, it would have been better if the design builder had done the geotechnical. I'm not saying that's the golden solution. It's not always. But it's not always calm seas, and design build's not just rosy pictures, always. So yeah, these are big risks, right? Geotechnical will always be a big risk in our industry. But if you can assign that risk to the entity best capable of handling it, it's kind of a beautiful thing. Imagine saying, contractor, go get your own geotechnical report. Is he ever going to come back to you and say, hey, your geotechnical report was totally wrong, differing site conditions? No, he's not, because it's his geotechnical report. Okay, so moving forward, my suggestion to you is that you do a full assessment and consider all of your options, because if it impacts the sequencing, the level of design, risk allocation, roles and responsibilities. It completely impacts everything. And there are advantages to the traditional design bid build approach. For folks that want to do an established way of doing business, they're very comfortable with it, this is how they like things to go, great. There's no legal barriers. Every entity is able to do the low bid, market availability. Remember that comment I said, it's not for everybody? We were on a job in Hoona, I remember this, Mark and I were, and he had some uplands work that they were doing, and he's a big proponent of design build. Electrical work is a common one that's been done design build for years, long before it became more common throughout the industry. And so he was promoting the industry there to do this uplands work that was electrical design build. And there was a lot of people promoting that he use a local contractor or local contractors. Totally fair and legit. But none of the local engineers liked design build. They're like, so I don't understand. You want me to give you a price for something, but you're not telling me what you want me to give you. Like, they just couldn't wrap their heads around it, right? So you do have to look at market availability. And if you have an industry or a certain segment of your industry that that market's not there for it, or the people aren't right, maybe it's not right. But more often than not, it is right. So again, we started with, if we want all these things over here, We want greater cost certainty. We want a quality product and less conflicts, fewer changes, etc. This is what it boils down to. We should consider assigning risk to the entity that is best capable of managing it. We should get rid of liability gaps. Early contractor involvement. I think that's a common sense one everybody gets. They're like, yeah, we should totally ask them too. We should follow well-established, proven best practices. Don't just do what our gut tells us, actually do what has worked. And then get the right team. It's really a lot about team, because at the end of the job, this is what we want to be doing. So you have resources out there. You actually have a lot. I don't feel like owners ask other owners enough. This association is one of my favorites, and I mean that genuinely, because all of you get in the same room and you're like, hey, this is what I'm doing in Homer. And Lucas might be like, well, this is what we're doing in Nome. Why didn't you guys think of this? Like, I realize you say it nicer, hopefully, but you're sharing ideas. Owners don't do that enough. They really don't. And you have owners even down south. I mean, don't call anyone in Seattle, but just kidding. There are people out there who've done something, and they can give you their feedback on their lessons learned, so capitalize on that. Other states, I have to say, I mean, the DOTs sometimes can just have too much process where you're like, oh my gosh, I would never follow their example. But the fact is they spend a lot of money doing research. They also spend a lot of money coming up with best practices. So we've put some design build or DBIA practices in front of you. WashDOT has a bunch too. So does CDOT, so does Florida. Like, the DOTs are a good resource. So contractors, if you're getting ready to start a project, call contractors. Don't call one. It's never good to call one contractor. Call multiple. Say, hey, how would you approach this job? Do you think we could go design build? And a contractor might tell you, no, I don't think this is a good job to do design build. Well, call two more. Get some opinions, you know. Reach out to the engineers. Ask them their thoughts. Ask the suppliers. Don't just go with one source. That's my point. An independent owner's representation. And I'm not promoting my own business here, I promise. I'm saying it's a good idea sometimes to get an independent entity giving you perspectives on everything. And you can put that out to bid. Just like you do your engineering services, you can write an RFQ and you can say, I just want owner's representation. And the same people that are responding to your design RFQs, they'll respond to that. They have those capabilities, absolutely. And then the Design Build Institute of America, I mentioned them a lot. They're like this organization. They're a nonprofit. They're a group of owners, engineers, contractors. It's really a mix. But they have some cool stuff. They have an owner's hotline. I believe it's in your packet. If not, it's on their website, where you can call and just ask questions, free. Education and training, they have conferences. So Dan Taddick and Sitka and Glenn Melvin and Kodiak both have gone to DBIA functions to learn more information, because it all can't be covered in something like this. But it's a great resource. They have the established best practices. They have ones applicable just to transportation. They have them on public-private partnerships, if you want more information on that. They also have draft RFPs and draft contract forms. So you can go on there and look how they're actually formatting all this stuff and what's worked well. So anyhow, any questions at this point? If not, we are going to move into a project showcase. So thank you, everyone.